start by asking a question to Daniela from the audience. So basically, it's a question from Oceanol, and he is asking, can you briefly discuss some of the ideas that could make the Platinum open access a viable option commercially?
Yeah, I already started answering. Thank you so much for that question. This is, of course, the most important, but also the most challenging question. So on the one hand, of course, there needs to be more funding. There are some grants in place where journals can apply. For example, the Swiss Academy for Arts and Sciences supports 50 journals with direct funding, so money. But of course, we need more options for journals to get funding besides donations and institutional grants and stuff like that. But another idea is also to build consortia. For example, libraries get together and have a Diamond Open Access Fund where journals can apply, but this is all still in the works. We have options, but there's not enough for direct funding. At the same time, I'm always insisting that direct funding is just one side. The other side is infrastructure, so the indirect support, because lots of journals actually save costs and need the support from open access experts or really appreciate the support. So we need infrastructures that offer hosting and other services maybe, and hopefully we can expand that kind of service portfolio for journals, that not every journal has to kind of build its own little publishing house around itself. So these are ideas, but as you know, political decisions are always kind of long or take a long time. So we will see what will happen in the future, especially as currently Swiss University is reviewing the national strategy for open access and will come up with an adjusted or a new strategy that will start in 2025. And I'm very hopeful that Diamond Open Access will then be more visible also in the national strategy. And this will hopefully also help institutions to reward and recognize editors of Diamond Open Access journals and their operations. And then, yeah, of course, reform of research assessment also plays a role, because if researchers don't really feel that what they publish in open access journals, or especially in Diamond Open Access journals, won't be rewarded in terms of, promotions or tenure and these things, then of course the success of Diamond Open Access also hinges on that. So this would be my long, short answer to this complex question. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we will take a question from the audience for Alessio, and I will show the question. So from Matthew Zolzman, Alessio, can you say something about the fraction of submissions that are sent out to review under your new model?
Yeah. Thanks, Julian. Thanks, Matthias. I didn't have time to show some of the data that we have been collecting since the launch, but the fraction is around, on average, 30% that are sent out to review. And this has remained, we don't have, it's not preset, so there isn't like a threshold or a goal there that is preset. But historically, it's the same fraction that used to be sent out to review in the traditional old publishing model. Yeah. And also, I can add probably to that even when looking at the corresponding authors' countries of papers that are sent out to review, as well as geography, so like as well as subject area, those also don't seem to change when looking at papers that are sent out to review.
Okay. So maybe I can take a follow-up question on this same topic from Rebecca Lawrence for you, Alessio, again. So I will choose the question. So can you talk about the proportion of authors that do each of the three different outcome options you mentioned? So do nothing, take paper to another journal outside of eLife, or revise and convert to eLife VOR?
Yeah. So we know of no example who take who took their papers and went to other journals, although technically it's an option. So far, we haven't had any such cases. In terms of those that are that undergo revisions, it, as you know, as you can imagine, the model was launched at the end of January, and it does take some time to kind of go through the revisions that are variable. So the actual numbers, I have to say, they are not that, the N that I'm basing my conclusions on is not that high. But we have had about a little over 100 version of records so far, and altogether, what I can say is that above 90%, in above 90% of the cases, we have seen revisions. So authors engaging with the recommendations from the reviewers and revising. And this is in line with a trial that was run before I joined the Life and before launching the new model to kind of get a sense exactly of whether authors would have taken up. And so in more than 90% of the cases, that's what's happening. And we have had some cases where the reviewed preprint version 1 went straight to version of record without revisions. In those cases, the reviews and the evaluation was always positive in the sense of the solidity of the data. There was variability in terms of the perception from the experts of the significance of the work, but it was case where the evaluation was positive. So I think this is all together encouraging, and it's in line with what we, based on the trial, that what we were expecting to see.
Thank you.
Okay, so a next question. So this was posted by Urs in the last session. So it's a question for Thomas, but I think Sejal might be able to chime in too. So he's asking about, under your model of Review Common, how do you choose the reviewers?
Yeah, so we choose the reviewers in a very similar way as at the journal, really based on expertise to cover the topics covered by the papers. The peer review process is handled and managed by our professional editors at EMBO Press, who handle the peer review for EMBO Journal, for EMBO Report, for MSB. And so we assign these Review Commons papers based on the topic that they handle usually, and they have essentially access to the same network of reviewers as for the journal. Our goal is really to have a completely portable peer review that benefits sort of from the same depth and expertise as for our journals, such that all our journals that collaborate with Review Commons can use them right away. So that's how it works.
Okay, so kind of related to this, since researchers are no longer submitting their articles to a single journal, how does the role of the reviewer change? Like, what criteria are the reviewers measuring the paper against? And Sejal, if you want to speak afterward, because at least with your model, there's sort of a limited number of journals, but as I understood it, Thomas, there are 21 journals where the paper might be going.
Yeah, no, it is a very good question. It's sort of the core of the question. By focusing the review on the science, we sort of remove this mixture of the peer review process and reviewers having to comment on the science, but also the fit for a journal. So we try really to separate that. So the role of the reviewers change a little bit indeed. We're very explicit with our reviewers that they should not comment for the fit of a given journal. We consider this as the work and the function of journals. Now, what do they have to comment on? Well, they have to comment on the science, of course, the strength of the conclusions, the evidence, but we have also a dedicated part of the peer review form, which we call significance or context, where the reviewers are asked explicitly to put this piece of work within the context of their field, whether, what's the magnitude of the advance, what is the nature of the advance, is it methodological, is it conceptual, what are the audiences that might be influenced and interested in this piece of work, what are the papers that have been recently published that come the closest to this submission, such that there is really this expert advice on what is the contribution of the reported results and findings in a more broad scope and context. And this is information that is very useful for the editors of the journals then to make the call whether the advance is sufficient for their journal or maybe not. So this is our way to focus the peer review on the science, having it expressed, in scientific term and research term, but at the same time keeping this peer review completely compatible with the journal process.
Yeah, and I can also add in from our model just to also kind of cover that first question a little bit on reviewer selection. And so that is, done again by evaluating, what expertise are needed to evaluate a paper, and done in conversation between journals that are involved in the review process. So if Cancer Cell and Immunity are both reviewing a paper, and Cancer Cell needs a clinical perspective, we try to make sure that we get that covers whatever field of expertise, but maybe from a more clinical perspective. That is just one example. And then, this question about what's the role of the reviewers. And so, so in our process, it's not journal agnostic. So the reviewers do know which journals we are considering the paper for. And we do also offer the reviewers to use a structured review form where they can kind of in various sections outline what what's the summary and strengths of the paper, what are, limitations, recommendations they would have for revisions, things about the transparency, presentation, interpretation, and also, again, a box where they can indicate what they see as the significance of the work in the context of the field. Some, and I essentially see two reviewer behaviors, over the course of doing this, and both are fine. Some reviewers do comment specifically on what they see as an advance for journal A versus journal B, or have recommended revisions for journal A versus journal B. Some don't comment on the journals at all. They, more really focus on, this is what the paper is, this is, limitations, this is what they would need to address. This is a really interesting advance. This is maybe a smaller advance based on XYZ other publications in the field. And I'd say that's fine too, because ultimately it is the job of the editors of the journals to decide for their journal, what they're looking for, what their level of advance they're looking for is. We've already done that initial evaluation, so we know it fits their scope. That's not really the call we're making at that stage. But yeah, ultimately, it's the editor's decision taking in that reviewer input, whether they've commented on a journal or not.
Okay, thank you. So now we have a question from the audience that I'll show. So the question is for Thomas. Do you plan to expand the Review Commons platform to other fields beyond biological sciences? And then I think that this second part is also interesting because it's something that Daniela mentioned in her presentation about using double-blind peer review as like a marker of journal quality. And so this question about open peer review or transparent peer review where referees' identities are revealed, is that what does that offer? Is that worth pursuing, or is it better to stick with blind peer review?
Yeah, so very shortly, extending to other fields beyond biological sciences, yes, we are quite interested. The first big expansion, but very challenging, would be to the medical fields, where the nature of the peer review process is somehow different from basic research. We would be interested, but this is a very big challenge. We are also trying to initiate conversations beyond the life sciences, especially for physics and computational science. There is a big tradition in computational science to do open peer review or transparent peer review for conference papers. And we're looking into whether we can sort of generalize and team up. That would be important also for funders and institutions to embrace really this model and support it. The open peer review versus transparent anonymous peer review, as we call it, these are complex questions. Our default is to keep the peer review anonymous. Our primary goal really is to assess the quality of the science, to have a critical process. Peer review for us is to obtain a critical analysis, a review from experts in the fields, the peer. This is what peer review is. And And the purpose really is to advance the science and to come to this ideal of a check whether the claims are correct or maybe less correct, or are strongly supported or less strongly supported. Of course, in a productive and constructive way. But this is really our primary goal. And we feel that to preserve the critical nature of the peer review, that needs to be scholar, that needs to be professional, where the wording has to be very measured and constructive, is really essential. And anonymity allows to extract a little bit the social structure of science, which is a reality. There are dependencies between individuals, between funders, scientists, PIs, famous scientists and less famous scientists, senior scientists and junior scientists, and we would like to mitigate the influence and the impact of this sort of social structure of science. Now, having said that, there are also very strong reasons why the peer review should not be anonymous, and the reviewers should be named, in terms of fairness, in terms of standing behind the arguments, instead of in respect of full transparency. There are fields like computational science where it is a standard. It is a cultural thing. It is for us in cell and molecular biology, we feel that we have more chances to have an unbiased and critical process with the anonymous peer review. However, we encourage our reviewers to reveal their names, and they are totally fine, of course, to do so if they want. The practice is that it's very rare that they reveal their names. Again, this is a highly cultural and issue from within a field. It is difficult to change this culture, and I think there is sort of pros and cons on both sides.
So maybe a follow-up question to that, to Kimberly and others that also do transparent peer review can comment. Have you seen like kind of like a trend, or like who is actually revealing their identity, like geographically or also career stage?
Yeah, this is a great question. I wish I had a complete answer for you on this topic. I can tell you that about 15% of our reviewers opt to reveal their names. That doesn't actually translate to 15% of the published manuscript, so that's of all the reviews. So it's relatively low at this point. It's optional. You know, I sort of agree with the things that Thomas said, that, you know, there's different ways to think about this. And for us, it's just important to have this option at this point for this relatively young journal. We do not yet have data on the geographic distribution of those career stage and those things. These are questions that we're definitely interested in answering, and we don't have that data compiled yet. In part, the numbers are still pretty low, so this will be coming though down the pipe.
And Alessio, do you want to add something? Because eLife has been doing this for quite a while, and it's like when we look at the reviews, some reviewers are actually giving their identity, but some do not. And is there a specific reason, or like also trends?
So in line a bit with what Thomas said about the you know, like pros and cons of revealing the names, or and all of that. With the new model, we don't have that option. So as of now, with the new model, all reviews are not signed, and they are signed kind of by eLife as a, if you wish, as an organization. If reviewers want, they can post their names on bioRxiv, because every review preprint that we produce also is kind of mirrored, if you wish, on bioRxiv, where you will have access directly from bioRxiv to the eLife assessment and the reviews by eLife. So reviewers can put their names there. But from the eLife perspective, as of now, we are not, because of pros and cons and considerations that were taken, like when this decision was taken, we are not revealing the names. Yeah. So as a consequence, you know, we don't have data on it.
Okay, thank you. And maybe on this same topic, Daniela, because in your talk, you were saying that by contrast, it's like you were talking about double blind. So basically, both authors and reviewers' name are not seen. So can you tell us how this works, and also if you have seen some benefits?
Well, not all the journals employ double blind, but oftentimes, this is considered like a high standard. But I know a lot of journals who don't employ double blind because in their discipline, for example, editorial review is more common. So it really depends on the discipline and the publication tradition. Really, and I feel like here it is a completely different tradition, because when I speak to editors of Diamond Open Access journals, they take pride in doing the reviews for their journal. They receive the submissions and they have an idea of how they want to put together an issue or a special issue. Of course, they don't publish a lot of articles. It ranges between sometimes 25 articles. Some journals have 200 articles a year. So we're speaking about small size or medium sized journals. But I know that most of them don't like the idea of outsourcing something like peer review, because they treat it as their editorial responsibility, to review the articles they receive and that they publish to ensure the quality. So here there seems to be, in the discussion, I can see that there seems to be like a division or a new form of editor, that doesn't necessarily do or does the reviews anymore, but receives articles that have been peer reviewed already, and then just they get funneled into different kind of journals. And I really wonder how that works. Are these journals so thematically so broad that they can just accept any kind of submission in that field, in that wider field? Or I really try to kind of wrap my head around how this is working.
Yeah. So Daniela, could you just tell us quickly? Because I know that you look at open access journals from all kinds of science, and here I think mostly we're talking about life science. So I think there are very big cultural differences. Can you just tell us kind of like what most of the journals that are open access, do they belong to certain fields?
So I can only speak for Diamond Open Access, but I can say that 68% of the journals pertain to the social sciences and the arts and humanities. So there's really a big chunk in these disciplines. But for example, in Switzerland, it's quite specific also in terms of life sciences, because there are also 20% of journals that are in the life sciences. For example, Swiss Medical Weekly is one big diamond journal in Switzerland. So maybe the most well known. Yeah, but I was just, I'm interested in that kind of debate, the role of the reviewer and the role of the editor, and how this is changing, and in what Kimberly, Thomas, and also Alessio, Jeja as well, what you've described, how your vision of this is, where this is going actually in terms of editing a journal.
So I'll just jump in here and say that typically what I'm familiar with is that the standard model is that a researcher will submit their paper to a journal, and the job of the editor is to kind of do an initial review and then choose experts that really know about that particular field and send it out to review from those experts. And that sometimes it's really quite a bit of work to find people who will agree to review the paper, who agree that, like, yes, this is within my field of expertise, I can do this. And so some of the what was presented today is how to make that process more efficient. But yeah, usually it's that the paper is received by the editor, and it's part of the editor's job to find appropriate reviewers. But yeah, I'd like to hear from the other panelists how you would respond to Diana.
Well, maybe I can try to explain a little bit this role of the editors, and I think the picture falls into place and becomes quite coherent if we think about the authors as sort of the center point. For us, it's very important that the authors are in control. So the papers are not, dispatched automatically to all kinds of journals that would accept them or anything like this. It is really the authors, in the light of the reviews, who decide where they want to submit the paper. And that depends really on the scope of their own work and, of course, matching scope of the journal. In our case, none of the journal, whether it's eLife or EMBO journal, is under any obligation to consider the paper or to accept it. So the role of the editor then is not so different from the role of an editor when reviews are coming back for a paper that they are considering, and they have to analyze these reviews and make a decision. Now, where it changes is that they have not obligatorily chosen their own reviewers that they know, and there is an issue of trusting that another journal, that another platform like Review Commons may select, appropriate reviewers, and that these reviews, I will see the name of the reviewers, I can trust them as if I would have now approached them myself. And this is a little bit of a barrier. And one can, I know, of course, I was editor-in-chief of Molecular Systems Biology for 15 years. And, my journal was my baby, and I was really very proud of it. And sort of to receive reviewers from the outside, there is a little bit of a barrier. And I think that the best way to overcome this barrier is really to think about what is our function as a journal. And the function is to communicate science, good science, very efficiently at the service of the authors and at the service of the readers. So nobody really benefits from making a huge competition across journals for the same reviewers. We actually want to pool forces to reduce the burden on reviewers. We all struggle to find reviewers. Reviewers have no time. Everybody is completely overloaded. So there's no advantage of having little journal here saying, oh, I want my reviewers and I will trust only my reviewers. We really need to pool forces and join forces where we can. And I think the peer review process is really where we can join forces to avoid the overburdening of the community, which is, starting to say, I have no time for that anymore. We want really to, the goal is not to protect sort of, the jobs of the editors or their pride. I think it's really to communicate the science the best we can. And having said that, to examine reviews that come from the outside and really looking at the argument, for us, it is a very strong criterion when we recruit more journals in Review Commons. We hope and we expect these journals to have very strong editorial teams who can do scientific decisions based on the review. So actually, it is a way to strengthen even more the function and the role of journal editors.
I think I can jump in a little bit here as well. So to the first question of, at our journal, what is the role of the editor? So we try to keep it sort of a low role. So, not a big barrier to entry at the editorial level. I look for scope and fit within the scope of the journal. And if a manuscript that's submitted falls within the scope that we are looking for, which is really across microbial sciences. So then it's scope and sort of just, if there's enough of a advance that we're looking for. But it's a pretty low barrier to entry, actually. And then it goes out for review, and I put our trust and faith in the reviewers to really help us decide this. But at the same time, it is a balance, as Thomas said, to respect the time of everybody involved. And so it's sort of balancing those two things. But we do send a majority of our submissions out for review with that philosophy in mind. And then coming back to this other topic of, sort of as a community accepting reviews from other platforms. We don't have an explicit policy on this at FEMS Microbes, but we have take this on a case-by-case basis, and I've personally handled a handful of manuscripts that have come to me with a request if they have reviews that they've addressed to another journal that didn't end up going through at that particular journal, would we consider them? And again, assuming that we have the right expertise on our editorial board, which we really strive for, that can evaluate the manuscript and the reviews and the responses accordingly, we're happy to take those. I think the editorial board has the expertise to, in general, cover that. So we're quite happy to do that and sort of, not waste any more people's time than necessary in this process.
Thank you. So I think maybe we can take now a question from the audience that is like more about this, what Thomas, Sejal were talking, so I'm going to show the question. So basically addressed to Sejal, Thomas, and also Kimberly, if submissions are aimed less and less at a particular journal, but more a group or portfolio of multiple journals, why do we still keep individual journals?
Yes, okay, I'll take first crack at that, and thanks for the question. Different journals, and also to kind of tie into that previous discussion we just had, through a system like CellPress multi-journal submission, there still is an edit, each journal doing their editorial process and evaluating those things, like scope, interest of the journal, where we like what the aims of the journal are to publish, and in advance, for what they would expect to publish in their journal. And so that kind of ties into, so those different journals have different scopes, different aims, different readerships, oftentimes. And that kind of, I think, to me, that's kind of what defines the differences between these journals. And yes, many journals will have overlapping scopes, and there might be a paper that could fit the scope of both Journal A and Journal B. And kind of that was the motivation to have this type of single submission system where you can be evaluated by both Journal A and Journal B, instead of giving it a shot at Journal A, saying, we don't really see this for us because, the part we're interested in isn't developed enough, or the advance is not, what we would expect to see, try Journal B. And so just to kind of do that at the same time. And it also, and oftentimes in those cases, if let's say, again, there are slightly different scopes or areas of interest that Journal A versus Journal B might have in the paper, and that might come out in the review comments. And we can say, for Journal A, these comments of the reviewer, would be really important to address because they would want, that's the scope of their journal, that's the readership they're interested in. Journal B would be more interested in you developing, these clinical points because that's the scope of their journal, that's the readership they're interested in engaging. And so that's kind of my perspective on that.
Is there anyone who wants to add something? Thomas?
Yeah, so first of all, I think it's important to realize that these reviewed preprint or manuscripts are actually submitted to in our case, to an individual journal. So the authors really say, I want to go to Journal of Cell Biology. It's not a parallel submission to 20 journals at the same time. So the authors really take their paper to a specific journal. We wanted to avoid this sort of parallelization thing. Now, maybe more deeply is, what's the function of journal in this world of preprint and reviewed preprint? And that's a good question. Yeah, I don't have perfect answers, but probably, Parth. I think a journal still is very important in the sense that it aggregates content around a topic or around some level of quality in its scope and with its scope and field. It acts as a filter with the criterion that they have, that they decide, and as long as this is perceived as a useful service, I think the journals are very useful. Maybe even more deeply, I think one of the core functions of journals, it's typically expressed as serving a readership, who can read these papers. But I think it's deeper than that. It really represents a community. And in all of its functions, who is reading these papers, but who are the authors and who are the reviewers. And in a way, the peer review process is a way for a community to organize itself to provide feedback on where the field should go, what kind of technical standards or conceptual standards are valued in that field. And so this role of the journal to represent the community from the different aspects, I think it's very important. And finally, I think more controversially maybe, is the concept of, you are either published in a journal or you are not. So it's a binary decision. So even if there is no accept and reject decision, at the end you have a version of record, which is another word, or you don't. Now, the editors of the journal usually are responsible for this decision. In the case of life, the authors are responsible for this decision themselves, but it doesn't really change the fundamental concept of having something in the scientific record or not having it. And that is sort of, we should, this would be hours of discussion. Why do we have that? It can be useful for young scientists to put an end to a project, and we all know how difficult it is to finish a project, the 99% and this 1% that needs still to be done to be finished. So there is maybe this aspect. There is sort of the big ideal of science to know what is true and what is not true, and try to reach this goal. If you accept it in a journal, it's maybe closer to the truth, which is very debatable. And so there is this dimension in the formal publication in a journal. Finally, there is the role in research assessment, which is highly debatable, and that has been overemphasized. And as you probably heard from last week about DORA, to try to de-emphasize this role of journal and journal prestige for the career of people. So all these dimensions are around the concept of journal, but I think community representation, aggregation around a scope, a field, and this role of filtering for science is all very important roles that are not taken by preprint or even reviewed preprint. I see these rather as independent product that allows scientists to demonstrate and communicate the research output in more different ways and varied ways than it was possible before. I don't see obligatory preprint and journals as being mutually exclusive at all.
Daniela, yes.
Yeah, can I just ask a question about transparency, because I'm really interested in the topic of transparency as well. So maybe it's to you, Thomas, and to you, Sejal. Do the journals know whether a paper got rejected by another journal? So you said you got 4 attempts, and isn't that also really frustrating for authors? Having to go through like auditioning. You go to different journals, you audition with your paper, saying like, "Hey, do you like that? And maybe I can change it a little bit, and then you like it better." Because you said the control is in the hands of the authors, but I feel like this must be a really frustrating experience if you go through 4 attempts and still your paper has not been accepted. Maybe you have to go back to the drawing board. And yeah, I would just like to know, how about transparency? Who knows how often a paper has been accepted or rejected?
Yeah, so it's a bit 2 separate questions. So who knows? So the journals do not know if a paper has been rejected by another journal. So we keep that completely confidential, such that we don't influence the second journal who thinks, "Ooh, if this has been rejected from that paper, that's certainly not for us." So this is absolutely clear. I think it's a very good question. And the journals do not know that it has been rejected by another journal. Now, it is also true that if you didn't find a home for your journal after 4 attempts, it is frustrating. It's, even if it's not accepted after the first journal, it is frustrating, because of course we want to find. So this level of frustration, I think we can try to reduce it. It's probably irreducible at some level, which is, the basis of formal publication. Again, you are either in or out, and we can discuss whether we really need that. I think we still need it, but I'm really open to hear all kinds of arguments, and certainly to provide more means to communicate the science, in a way that is not black and white, accept, reject. And I think this is exactly what reviewed preprints do. Now, it is also important when thinking about these things, is it frustrating after four rejection or not, to try to have not an absolute judgment, but a little bit of a comparative. Is that system better than what we knew before? And I would say yes. And from our data, we know that it takes, on average, we published 900 papers, I think, now across all the journals with review comments. And it takes on average two attempts. So you try one journal, maybe they don't want it, you try the second one, you are in, on average. And this is much lower than in the wild. So I think we reduce the frustration to some level, but since we work with journals, there is this accept reject dimension, even with eLife. So they still reject, very similar to what Alessio said. I think 60% of the paper that transferred, and that's sort of the formal publication route. For us, what is important is that the science and the peer reviews are available, irrespective of the decision.
Thank you. Sejal, you want to add something?
Actually, if I
Oh,
no,
Alessio.
yeah, no, sorry, I wanted to add this because I think it's really the power, really, and the kind of possibility that is there with a review preprint. I think this type of discussions of kind of trying to understand, as Thomas was saying, what's a better way to go about evaluating it. It clearly has to involve all sorts of stakeholders, including those at the end who then decide what's indexed, what's not indexed, or what's right. But I think a very good positive sign, in my opinion, in that direction is to have seen and continue seeing organizations, institutions, including funders, who already, as I mentioned quickly at the end of my talk, who already recognize the use of reviewed preprints for research assessment, because exactly that is where you don't have a binary 1-0 decision anymore, and where you just have the evaluation of that out. And you can then think of all sorts of ways to integrate that according to fields that could still be completely independent of the entity journal, essentially, in a kind of if you wish, ecosystem where you have all research that is published there as a preprint. It's immediately accessible, it's freely accessible, it's powerful, it can lead people very quickly. At the same time, it can mislead, and so it's really about kind of leveraging that power to then essentially solve the main obstacle that the preprint has, which is that it doesn't have a quality control, and especially a non-expert reader has no clue whether they can trust it. And so developing systems that curate post-publication that can be powerful and can reduce significantly the time with which a peer-reviewed piece of science is out available to the public compared to a traditional system. That time is significantly reduced, and that means that you can build on that research way more quickly.
Yeah, I think it's great what you say, Alessio, and I think it's also very cool to see sort of the numbers that you have recently published with, to release a reviewed preprint in the public takes something like 70 days, which is, exactly like review comments. And we can compare that. We have estimated the time it takes for a normal normal submission that is either accepted in one of our journals or rejected and then accepted later. We have measured this time, and it is in the order of 200 to 1 year, 200 days to 1 year. So the acceleration in disseminating peer-reviewed research is really substantial.
Sejal, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I was just gonna, respond to Danielle's original kind of question you posed about, and kind of the whole mindset for launching multi-journal submission was to try to reduce that author frustration of being rejected, journal to journal, and being transferred journal to journal to journal. Within Cell Press, that direct journal submission route will always exist, and you will always be able to submit directly to any one of the journals. And you might they are highly selective journals by their nature, and so the majority of papers submitted to Cell do not go to peer review. They are editorially rejected and potentially offered transfers to other subject journals or Cell Reports family journals or multi-journal submission. We can see that transfer history. So journals might will know that this was submitted here, and we have duplicate cross-journal duplicate submission checks, and some of that is to catch kind of duplicate submissions that are that authors should not be making, because multi-journal submission is kind of its own entity. Yes, it's submitting to multiple journals at once, but it's still through a single submission system, so it doesn't break those publishing ethics rules of having a paper being considered by more than one journal at once. But within Cell Press, we can see if a paper has been previously currently, or it was previously at a journal, to make sure that that's not otherwise happening. But all that said, again, these different journals have different aims, interests, scopes, and so a reason it was rejected at Cell probably might not be it's not a reason that a downstream journal would reject the paper. And so as professional editors, that's kind of our job to evaluate the paper specifically for our journal or for my team across multiple journals, to keep that in mind.
Okay, so to change topic a little bit, but I think this is related to what Thomas and Alessio were talking about a minute ago, is the idea of preprints and not being peer reviewed. And I think that, and one of the questions I have, is there a way to introduce peer review to preprints like bioRxiv? And maybe you already talked about this a bit before, Thomas, about like reviewed preprints and what is the role of the journal. But I'm interested to know what more people think about this idea of peer reviewed preprints.
Who wants to go?
Yeah.
Do you want to go?
Maybe it's too big of a question.
Well, it depends a bit what the question really is. Maybe I misunderstand, but I understand it as, would it be feasible for bioRxiv itself to peer review all the preprints by default? Is that the question? Yeah. And I think the answer is probably no. Because of the scale. So all our journals, whether it's Cell Press, Sea Life, Review Commons, journals or not journals, we struggle to find the reviewers. So it is really difficult. And for specialty journals like molecular systems biology and molecular medicine, and so we have to ask on average 10 to 11 people to secure on average 3 reviewers. And with extremes in the distribution of the number of people we have to invite, that is much larger than that. We may have difficulties sometimes with difficult papers, and we have to invite 20 or more people. So the effort in peer reviewing is underestimated, and this is one of the function of the journal, is actually run that stuff in a professional way with chasers, respecting the deadline, finding the right expertise. So this costs a lot of money, needs very expert people to do it all the time. So to scale that at the level of bioRxiv, that it is possible, but would require the appropriate amount of money that would come from I don't know where, maybe from APCs, and we would have reinvented the journal. Now that's sort of the standard answer. Now the non-standard answer is that things are going to change very quickly, because of what we didn't talk today about, which is artificial intelligence. And I think with AI now, the hope and also the worry that AI agent starts to understand more and more of the science that is written in a paper is getting a little bit more real. And And it is not difficult to imagine that AI agents will be able to do some kind of review. It's not going to be peer review, because in no way these AI are our peers, but there will be, it is easy to imagine that there can be some assessment by AI agents. Probably not in-depth peer review, how the, you know, the insights and what other experiments you could have done, and I think that, but sort of a minimal level of quality check in terms of whether the right statistics have been applied, whether the methods are complying to some standards, an analysis of the figure, of consistency, etc. I think it's already happening now, and to put this in production is a lot of effort, but this is going to happen. And so in that sense, this minimal technical consistency review might be scalable with AI. I'm quite optimistic about that.
Yeah, I think then I wanna be quick, because I guess both me and Thomas already kind of talked a bit about preprints, but I think like one long-term way that could make this scalable is by simply exactly imagining a bit of an ecosystem where the service that the journal and probably then the word journal doesn't apply anymore, but the service that it would provide is really just attaching assessments and evaluation and curation after publication. And so if you imagine an ecosystem where this becomes the norm, then you could see how that could become probably as it becomes, then it could become more scalable, and it could become more widespread. There might be some limits there, and as in terms of scalability and AI to probably perform some form of very I'm going to use the word first of some first form of filtering, which is not peer reviewed, could help as well. But I think it really goes. I think the answer it goes back to really what we think a journal or being a journal means, and where do we envision kind of the future of scientific publishing to be, and the role of the journal in that ecosystem to be.
If I can add on this, and so some things that I was concerned, and I would be concerning as a scientist with all this new approach, is that so you have the paper and attach the peer review, and then it's up to the scientist, to the student, to the postdoc to read the whole package and to basically decide if the paper it can be trusted or not. I think I think this might slow down science. And also for like maybe more junior investigator, junior researcher, it's actually difficult to make their own opinion. So yes, this is a comment, but I think this is still important to keep in mind that it's transparency, and you can comment of what I'm saying, but transparency is great, but it's also a lot of work for the scientists on the other side if they have to read papers, reviews attached, response to the reviewer comments.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't know, maybe I'm talking too much. I totally agree with you. I think this is a really great point. That's why, you know, to make a decision out of the complexity of a peer review process is an important step that needs its own expertise. It's never black and white, and the peer review process is not a voting procedure. So we need editors with all the expertise and being able to do that. I think also a related point is that we have to think whether, you know, every piece of science really needs in-depth peer review, and personally I don't think so. It is sort of related to who is going to use who are going to use these results. I think if you think of a very specialized piece of science that is very well done, but that is very focused on one specific methods thing, or even advanced, going from one species to the other. Very carefully done. Does that really need in-depth peer review? Maybe not, because the people who will read and use this science, it's maybe a handful of scientists, which is not exceptional. I think in the life science, we should not have the illusion that all the papers are read by thousands of people. Usually it's a very small amount of experts who are interested. And if these experts are from the field, well, they can construct their opinion, based on the paper. They actually don't need anybody else. They can do their assessment. If they're a little bit further, then if this is a piece of work that will interest also people a little bit laterally, from connected fields, these readers may benefit quite a bit of having at least background analysis from expert and so on and so on. And if a piece of work is really of completely general importance, it changes the paradigm, how we see the universe, so on. Of course, there you really want the best expert to scrutinize that in all ultimate detail, that we can really say, okay, we have to see the world now from a different point of view. So I think the utility of the peer review, like we do it at Review Commons, like eLife is doing it. I think, Alessio, you said whether we can do useful reviews. What does it mean? It's sort of related to how useful and how broadly useful the piece of research being reviewed is. And I think we just review too much. It is unbelievable. We want that every paper is being seen by 3 experts spending 6 to 8 hours each on every paper, which is not scalable, and it might not be actually required.
Yeah, if I can quickly add, and then I don't want to monopolize as well the conversation too much, but I think that's a good point, Julie, and you're perfectly right. I agree that that's the challenge. With the power of developing a publishing system that builds on the advantages of preprints and that tries to kind of tackle the disadvantage of a preprint, that is the fact that they don't have a quality control. With that great potential, in my view, it comes the challenge that you highlight, Julie, of how you make the system work in a way that then actually you don't end up slowing down because people won't have time, and it's tricky and difficult to go through the reviews, and that's where we don't think we got it right 100%. So that's where we are trying to outreach and get more people on board to experiment with us and to implement the model and get interested and give us feedback and work with us as a community. But that's where the one of the major role of the life assessment is, the idea being really that it's kind of short, it sits underneath the abstract, you cannot kind of miss it, and it's written with words in bold that at least even to a non-expert you might not get the whole picture, but they should give you an idea, even if you're not an expert, of the level of significance and solidity and level of trust, then, if you wish, that you can rest. And then if you want, you can go through the reviews and yeah, to then touch on what Thomas was mentioning on the decision, that's one of the idea. Yes, if you have a paper that is might very well be relevant about, I don't know, how to surgery for kidney stones or something like that. If you have the feeling that the readership of that is very likely going to be a readership that is able on their own to evaluate the paper, then there is the likelihood as well that the public review and assessment exercise might be less useful than for another for another paper, which has nothing to do with the value of the paper itself. And I think I realize the kind of the question whether, what does it mean producing useful reviews? It remains foggy because there is no other way that it doesn't remain foggy, and it will overlap with what used to be, at least in our case, reviewed before. But I think it's important to kind of, I think what's valuable is by asking the question from another perspective, like not is this a good fit or does this meet a certain bar, but rather from the other perspective allows you to expand the scope of what you can review and to kind of go out of the major bulk that forms the distribution of papers, to explore details of their distributions and expand the scope of what you can review. Yeah.
Okay, so time flies and it's already 3:45 Central European time, so I think we should wrap up. So thank you everybody who's on the panel for your participation, and thank you for everyone in the audience for some great questions. So let me just share again. I'm going to have to start from the beginning, but I'm just going to put our program back up. So right now we're going to have a 20-minute break and then go into our next session about alternative research outputs. And after you have a chance to grab a drink and stretch your legs, we'll have some tables in the Airmeet Lounge in case people want to discuss casually or seriously more about what we've talked about. So thank you everyone very much.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.